Hello, thanks for listening to this week's new episode. Quick favour to ask, anyone who missed last week's episode will have missed me begging for everyone to go to nextgreatpodcast.com, where you can vote for my podcast pilot, Development Hell, which is currently competing to go to series against 9 other podcast pilots. I mean, you're welcome to listen to all of them and pick your favourite, or, if you just want to do me a favour, just go and vote for Development Hell. It's literally about 3 clicks, no sign up or anything like that, and it would be massively appreciated. Very beneficial to myself and to Diminishing Returns as well. So please, if you're a fan of the show, do go and vote. The last day for voting is the 8th of December, so you have just over 1 day from the point that this goes up. So anyone who listens to this right away, I assume that means you're a big fan and I can count on your vote. Just to reiterate, that's nextgreatpodcast.com and vote for Development Hell. Thank you very much, everyone. Now, here is the episode.
Hello and welcome to Diminishing Returns, the podcast where we discuss films. Basically, that's what we do. And today we have the OG crew. That's right, it's me, Alan. I've got Sol over there.
Hello.
And joining us is Calvin.
Hello, thank you for having me again.
Oh, we always have you anytime, Calvin, you know that. So, I'm going to pass over to my good friend Sol here, because, Sol, you are going to tell us why this week we are doing Monsters, Inc.
We did one of those Patreon vote polls.
Oh.
That's the short version. Disney Pixar are releasing their new film, Soul. Finally, it's coming out straight to Disney Plus on the 25th of December. Is that right? Christmas Day, or is it Christmas Eve?
Christmas Day, I believe. And is that worldwide, or is that just in the States as of recording?
I was under the impression it was worldwide, but that might not be.
They're releasing in theatres where theatres are open, but
yeah,
I don't know where that is.
But unlike Mulan, this isn't a premium thing. This is something that is just going on Disney Plus for everyone. You don't have to pay any extra money, I believe. So I'll be signing up for Disney Plus for December.
Well, there might be something to the fact that Disney Plus launched in November of last year, and they had a $60 you could, or whatever it was in America, you could sign up for a year's worth of the streaming service. And so people are going to be coming up to their renewal times again.
Yes.
Maybe. I don't know if that's the reason, but yeah. Because Soul is a bit of a casualty of the pandemic, really, isn't it? I mean, this should have been out in theatres, but it's not. It's going straight to the streaming service.
Yeah, and I mean, this is that classic loss leader, non-sustainable thing. Netflix do a few of these each year, big prestige. We're putting way more money into this than we can really justify because we might get an Oscar out of it type movies. I suppose this is at that level. It's a real quote-unquote movie with a real budget that was meant to go out in cinemas. And I must say, I can't wait for Soul. I think it's got a very, very strong chance of being my favourite film of the year. Not that that's a huge achievement in 2020.
Well, it sounds very in the same vein of Inside Out, which I thought would have been a more appropriate film for us to talk about in relation to this.
Well, you may think that, Calvin, but democracy is a strange beast, and you don't always get what you want. We could have demanded a recount. Yes, well, we wanted to do a Pixar film to build up to Soul, so we put it to our patrons. We took out the option of the ones we've already covered. Which
so
we've
what's
done a
that?
few
Toy
episodes.
Story trilogy.
We've
Incredibles,
done Finding Nemo.
Finding Nemo. Is that
We've
it?
done quite a few. They voted for Monsters, Inc.
It was tight though. It was a real battle. It went between. Initially, Monsters, Inc. ran away with it, but then Wall-E mounted a kind of late comeback. Monsters, Inc. did win, but there wasn't much in it.
Right, so Monsters, Inc. What is it, 2001?
Yes.
Where were we in the life of Pixar? Obviously, Toy Story, Bugs
Very
Life.
early on. That's it, isn't it?
Is that what? Is this the next one?
Toy Story 2.
Oh yeah.
This is a phase of Pixar history that I must say I'm not overly keen on, which is why I'm surprised that this one won, actually, because I didn't think that people were terribly fond of this property.
Really?
When I think of
people
Pixar...
love Monsters, Inc.
I've never really understood it. When I think of Pixar High Point, I think of, like, Ratatouille, WALL-E, Up, Toy Story 3. That is, like, golden era Pixar for me, and this is...
Cars 2.
Well, that came before WALL-E, before Ratatouille.
Cars, Ratatouille, WALL-E, that run of classics.
Cars 2.
But Monsters, Inc. did get a sequel, and it will have a series up, coming to Disney Plus. So I suppose, yes, there are people who really enjoy this one.
Yeah, I mean, they're making a big thing about this series coming to Disney Plus, but I don't know. When I see they're making a TV show based on an animated Disney movie, I just think, well, yeah, they always do that. Like, there was an Aladdin cartoon in the 90s, and Timon and Pumbaa had a cartoon. Isn't that just what they're doing here? Or is this like a proper Pixar putting some effort in level TV show? I mean, I just assume it's part of their TV wing, isn't it? I don't know.
Okay, good industry knowledge.
I do agree with what you were just saying there, Calvin, about how it feels like latter day Pixar. I always think of early Pixar being real... not low-hanging fruit, but like obvious choices. We're doing a toy movie, we're doing a fish movie, and then I always think of latter-day Pixar being a bit more like we've run out of obvious ideas, so now we're just going a bit crazy, and we get the likes of Up. An old man and a kid fly a house to a tropical world and meet a load of super intelligent dogs that fly aeroplanes. It's insanity. And I feel like Inside Out and The Good Dinosaur and all these kind of films that have come since are all kind of a bit more just weird and strange concepts. And Monsters, Inc. to me is that. It's a fucking weird idea for a film.
I suppose so, because even if you think of like Finding Nemo, it's like, a road trip thing, with a goal, or you're searching for something, but it's fish, and they're like, that's fine. Whereas
Finding Nemo is Toy Story, but with fish, pretty much. It's the same basic plot structure and all that stuff. Monsters, Inc., you're right. It is just a weird, like it's a self-contained thing, isn't it? It's like it couldn't really exist outside of that world. It's not just, I get the whole monster under the bed, like imaginary monsters scaring kids, all that. But, I can see how someone might land on that. But then it's this whole idea that the monsters do it to generate electricity or energy through portals that are, powered, that open up through doors, and they end up getting banished to Earth and they meet a cryptid. And it's just, it's a very weird film that takes a lot of strange turns, and
to say it has those kind of strange concepts, it doesn't struggle to set them up in the beginning, does it? It feels quite smooth, easy exposition. We sort of understand what's going on.
It's a very blatant exposition dump up front, and I feel like Pixar perhaps are a bit better than that now. They're not quite as obvious as... I love the opening scene, which is a kid in bed being scared by a monster, but then the monster falls over and you realise it's like a training exercise, and the monster's kind of not a good monster at scaring kids, and he's making a fool of himself. Then the head of the company walks out and sort of goes, "Of course, you all know why you're here. You're all here because we're monsters and we have to scare kids to create electricity, and here are the rules of how it works." And that was a bit like, okay.
And then they watch an advert with them in it, just sets up the company, what's going on.
Yeah.
Just on the concept, just before we get into the nitty-gritty of the story, I think we talked about this in an earlier Pixar episode, where we kind of talked about the Pixar structure of, like, just starting with a concept, like, what if your toys came to life? And this one is kind of like, what if the monster in your closet is actually really nice? I don't feel like it's too far removed from what they would normally do. I guess it's different in that it's not really a road trip film, which most of them are.
I think the difference for me is it's like if Toy Story used the same jumping off point but then we found out that the toys were all alive because some evil scientist had, created life in toys 100 years ago, and then they had to travel back through time to figure out what... It just feels like the film takes a lot of strange turns and has a lot of extra ideas in there that all work and complement it, but they almost feel like tangents, if you know what I mean, and I like it for them, but it feels like a much messier... Messy's not the right word. It feels like a far more complex world, I suppose, than...
Well, where Pixar succeeds is its emotional drive. That's what they nail down and get right so often. And I think here it's like what really is the story, and it seems to be about what happens when your mate has a kid and then they suddenly can't hang out with you anymore and you get jealous. But then at the end they get rid of it, so it's all right. That's the message of the film. Get rid of your kids so you can hang out with your mates more often. Which is what we've done.
Solid message.
We're sticking with that, aren't we?
But it is it's a nice twist. It's very kid friendly as well, that the monsters are actually really afraid of the kids, and that a kid gets into the monster world and all the havoc that it's a nice subverting of those expectations. It's quite empowering for some of the younger kids watching as well, which is nice. So I think that all works very nicely for the audience that they're going for.
That's another point, actually. Another weird element of this film is that they believe children are all highly toxic and therefore very dangerous. Which I suppose more a necessity of making the story work than just a weird flourish. But
yeah, so we get a lot of setup here, and we set up Randall Boggs, who is the sort of the obvious antagonist. But the film doesn't really get going until this kid pops back through the door, and we have the child in the monster world, and that's when it really sort of kicks off, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess so. It spends most of its time before that just setting up the world, letting you live in it a bit. You see that Mike is... I mean, he's in a relationship with Jennifer Tilly, so I don't know. It's almost treated like the stakes are a bit higher than... You're almost meant to think like, ooh, is he going to blow this date? But they seem to be in a pretty committed relationship.
You're right. It might work better if he's finally got the date with the hot girl, but he needs to really impress her, so anything that goes wrong could mess it up. As opposed to just going, look, I'm sorry, love, I know this is supposed to be important, but there's something big going off, so I need to just go and sort this out.
I mean, basically, Sully has to cover for Mike doing his paperwork, so he stays late one night so he can go off to this date, and then there's a weird door left out and a kid comes in.
Yes.
There are some shenanigans going on with Steve Buscemi's character, so there's something going on. We don't know what it is yet, blah, blah, blah. But basically what ends up is that Sully has this little, 2-year-old toddler hanging on, and he has to hide it, and then basically quite quickly becomes emotionally attached to it. The weird thing about the structure is I was watching it and I was waiting for it to change. Like they were running away from Randall, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, there's got to be some switch here. Like, this is only the second act. There's got to be an ending. And then it never happened. It just sort of came to a sort of conclusion of that journey.
I had a thought, this setup's going on a bit, and then I
exactly.
Looked at the runtime, and I was like, "Oh, we're halfway through the film."
That's exactly what I did. Yeah,
45 minutes in. Okay, fair enough.
I think to one of your points earlier on, Alan, that you said that Pixar normally always sort of start with the emotional core of it and then kind of expand it out from there. I do feel like this one was very much sort of grounded in, okay, well, a young kid comes into the monster world, and then that's a funny concept because then we can have all these monsters being afraid of her and all that kind of stuff. And it feels to me as if the emotional side of it is kind of tagged onto that. I feel like the concepts about the monster world and the girl coming in and all that kind of stuff are kind of where it started. And then this, okay, well, what is this really about? It's about these friends, about this monster and this girl.
Yeah, I think, yeah. And that's perhaps a complaint that I never do quite. As much as I enjoyed the film and kind of just go along with it, it's perfectly nice, there isn't some kind of really hard-hitting emotional core there.
Yeah.
Which you expect from Pixar, I guess. And I think more so than that, there is usually some empathetic nature that the audience would go, oh yeah, well, I remember being a kid and I would talk to my toys or whatever,
I think that's there. I think the idea is you're meant to go, I remember being a kid and being scared of the monster in my closet, but I just don't think that's as common or universal an experience as the film would like you to believe. But I think the emotional beats are there. I think for some people, the whole forming a bond with a child thing will really get them quite hard.
Get them hard? It's not appropriate.
I think, it's not something that really works for me on an emotional level, but that's because kids are annoying.
Do you know what? I think perhaps we, as a bunch of barren old men, are not the target audience.
But that's what I mean. I think if you were like a parent or you really like kids, then I think it probably would work. Although I must admit, what you're talking about, a kind of hard-hitting emotional aspect of Pixar. I think if Pixar made this, 5 films later, perhaps he would have to say goodbye to Boo forever at the end, and that would be the end, and there would be more reason as to why he had to do that, and that would be the point of the film, and it would end on a really tear-jerking moment, as opposed to just they kind of have to say goodbye, but then he can go back and visit her whenever he wants because it's happy after all.
Well, it does. It has that moment where he's like, "Oh, I'm not going to be able to see her again," and then it kind of has the little happy ending add-on. Which, you're right. I think Pixar are a bit braver later on, where they will give you the kick to the gut, and that's okay.
Here it is them having their cake and eating it too, whereas in future they'd wait for just another sequel to eat it. Like I look at Toy Story, But here, I mean, and I think that moment where he's saying goodbye to her, he puts her back, it is really cute. It's probably the first Pixar film where they just about get away with a human character not looking like some kind of horrific monster, so that helps as well.
That's the worst thing about Toy Story 3. They kind of cleaned up how terrifying Andy looked instead of just making him look like this bog-eyed like mannequin ventriloquist dummy come to life.
But here Boo's quite cute. I like that she has to, at some point she actually does have to overcome a fear, which is quite scared of Randall, and she has to take him on, so I think that's quite nice. And I think just, Sully just as a character, he's this big, friendly, fluffy blue thing. He's a very appealing character from that perspective.
Well, I mean, again, this is probably more relevant to the second one, but throughout these films, there's an idea that Mike isn't scary, so he's delegated to a kind of trainer role for a scary monster. Now, if both of these monsters came out of your closet in the middle of the night, I don't know about you guys, I think I would be terrified if a giant eyeball with spiky teeth and horns and little gangly like spider legs and arms came out, compared to like a big fluffy dog, but it's blue.
Yeah, the kitty.
No, I agree with you, but
if only because Sully looks like a real life mammal, more or less, whereas the other thing is this alien, God knows what horror from another world. So I never quite got the idea that Sully is the really scary one and Mike isn't. But anyway, But these films never seem to get beyond the idea that being scary is like how loud you can roar. They kind of play lip service to the idea.
Yeah, you're right. And specifically in Monsters University, which I did rewatch actually.
I did as well,
even though we're not specifically talking about it. In that, it's kind of like that's the whole point of it, that you don't have to be the obvious thing to fit in, or you don't have to play by the rules kind of thing. But it never really gets away from, you need to be big, raw, and scary, that it never quite manages to hammer that home.
They're never going to actually, terrify kids anyway. Yeah. Like, that's going to... And when it does happen in the first film, when Boo gets really scared, it is like a big moment. It's probably one of the bigger emotional moments in the thing. So they really try to gloss over it, though, I think. They don't want to make the audience scared of these characters.
Now, this is still early Pixar to the point that the animation is... while incredible for when it was made, and, it still holds up perfectly fine, it's not perfect in the way that modern Pixar kind of is. You know, at the start of the film, I was thinking, oh, the texture on those monsters is a bit. They kind of look like plastic. They kind of look like the toys in Toy Story. And then we cut to Sully, and he's covered in fur, and I was like, oh, I like him. He's fluffy. They've done that really well.
Well, I remember featurettes from the time where they were talking about how groundbreaking the technology was, specifically on his hair and his
huge
fur.
Breakthrough,
yeah.
Being able to do thousands and if not more of fibers on screen.
It's amazing that they have to draw every single one of them for every frame. I mean, how many Koreans do you have to hire to do that?
Yeah. Well, you say that, but there was something about, they needed to be sort of placed individually or something like that, or at least, in patches depending on where the joints of the model were, and then they had to react to, light and shadow and wind and all that kind of stuff. And when he moves, like, for just them to have the bounce and up and down sort of stuff, it was an awful lot of work that is probably just taken for granted now.
I was wondering, and I suppose this is about early Pixar in general rather than just this film, and I realise this might sound like absolute heresy. How would you guys feel if Pixar were like, we're going to do a full-on remaster of some of our old films, and we're going to go into the old digital files, we're going to kind of up the textures and just make them look a bit nicer, and then re-render all these old films, and they'll look like, not modern animation exactly, but they'll look a lot less old, and it'll be more or less the same exact film. Because I know that, like, George Lucasing stuff, I'm not a big fan of that, but video games do this a lot, where they'll just kind of remake a game and it is the exact same game except the graphics are improved. And South Park did a very similar thing where they went into all their old digital files and added the widescreen stuff on the sides of the screen, so it, wasn't just being stretched.
It's this mentality, Saul, that has given us live-action Lion King remakes and all these things. Oh, what if it looks more real?
I'm not saying, I wouldn't say put it out as a new film. It'd just be like a remaster of the classic,
Nah, why do that when you just can, get a little girl to run around on a green screen for a couple of days and then just build the animation around her, and there we go, live-action Monsters, Inc. That's not really live-action. No.
I mean, that can't be far away from happening. They're up to Lilo and Stitch, for fuck's sake. They're nearly done with the entire Disney catalogue, so I think they are going to be moving into weird side properties soon.
Can we talk about the voice cast, which, with the exception of one character, I think is uniformly quite fantastic. Roz is the only character that I'm not overly keen on, but then that is obviously, it's someone involved in the behind, it's a writer or something, Bob Peterson. And I just think you can tell, like, animate, a lot of Pixar and DreamWorks, especially without this time, I feel like they did it quite a bit, where it was just like, oh, someone on the crew just did, like, the scratch voice, the temporary voice. Yeah, exactly.
And that was, and we thought it was so funny, we couldn't imagine it being done by anyone else. And it's like, ugh, well, you should have done.
Wazowski, you didn't file your paperwork last night. Don't let it happen again.
Yeah, because it's just like, oh, if someone, a proper actor was doing this, it'd be so much better. Like, was Estelle Getty still alive? B. Arthur was still alive. You could have gotten her.
Yeah, I completely agree. This isn't just me as a cranky adult who's aware of this. As a kid, I remember watching this and thinking, oh, that's a shit voice. Like, I remember it jumping out at me before I knew who Billy Crystal was or anything like that. I just remember thinking, like, oh, I don't like that. And it's because it's just a man doing a silly voice, but he can't particularly emote when he's doing
Firestein doing it.
Oh, wow. Saul, you didn't tell us Bob Peterson himself was coming on the podcast
today. No, I completely agree. I think, Roz aside, it's a really nice job of casting. I will say perhaps it's a bit obvious who they go for compared to other Pixar movies, but it's all obvious and it works. John Goodman is an obvious, big, warm, fluffy monster who can be scary when he needs to.
Well, he sounds like a lot like Rip Torn in this film. Did you think that? I kept thinking it was Rip Torn's voice.
No. What?
I never think anything is Rip Torn.
You listen to John Goodman in this.
Randall's your monster. You think he's going to come through the closet and scare you. Oh, boy, how do I explain this? It's empty. See? No monster in here. Well, now there is, but I'm not going to scare you.
But that's not going to happen, because I know about the lump in your bosom.
But yeah, do you think that they wrote Mike Wazowski as an obnoxious character and then got Billy Crystal? Or do you think he brought that to the role himself?
I think it was probably a bit like, ooh, we can get Bill. I reckon they did finesse it around Billy Crystal. Yeah.
Think Albert Brooks wasn't available?
Yeah.
Albert Brooks is too elegant.
Too avuncular.
Mike's got a kind of clumsy oafness about him that, you need someone like Billy Crystal to bring to.
Remember as well, Billy Crystal had turned down Buzz Lightyear for Toy Story. And,
Christ.
and he said that. He's said that in interviews, and he was like, "Oh, so whatever they offer me next, I better take it." So this is
well, this is a callback to our Hamlet episode, but we kind of agreed that Billy Crystal, who was in Kenneth Branagh's Hamlet, that's the connection here. We all kind of agreed that. I mean, you liked him in that film, but we did all agree that Billy Crystal is kind of a bit. There's an air of desperation about every bit of acting he's ever done. And that's not to say that he's bad, it's just it feels like he's trying really hard. And I didn't like that about his turn in Hamlet, but I think it works perfectly here because Mike is an inherently, desperate character, isn't he?
I think that really comes across a lot more in Monsters University again, which I think maybe they just something they saw in the character and went with it. They're kind of desperate to belong and whereas I think what he's supposed to be on the page here in Monsters Inc., like they're hot shit. This pair, everyone loves them. Everyone likes them as people. They're great at their job. They're famous. There is that bit where he's in the advert, but his face gets covered, but he's still super excited about it. He's a little bit narcissistic, I suppose. He's very self-centered.
He's got a hot girlfriend. He's going out with Jennifer Tilly. Yeah. I know she's like a Medusa with snakes for hair because it's Monster World, but you can tell it's supposed to be like a top tier, really hot monster because it's voiced by Jennifer Tilly.
I think it works, but I think he does come across as more obnoxious than perhaps he was written.
I don't really know if I get that
I think
side of him.
Comes across as obnoxious and stuff, but I always get the sense that that's the character, as intended. I mean, maybe that's just them working with what was happening in the recording studio and everything, but I think that character works really well, and I don't know, I kind of get what you mean. The idea does seem to be that they're hot shit and it doesn't quite track with him, but I don't know, it works, and it works even more when you do get into Monsters University and you see, they're kind of this double act that have pulled each other along.
But Sully is the one, he's really nice. He makes the right decision every time. He's a great guy. Everybody likes him. Whereas Mike is kind of pushed into doing the right thing or has to do it because he's in a desperate situation. Ultimately he's still a good guy. But it's not quite the same.
Yeah.
Which is, that's all right. You need different characters. Otherwise, it'd be boring.
Exactly.
But yeah, so we have Mary Gibbs as Boo, the small child. Never done anything else. Classic child star gone bad. Started doing coke. Very difficult to work with, apparently. Very demanding.
She was, of course, I believe, a kid of one of the staff on the film, is that right? They just...
I think so.
Yeah, put a microphone in front of her, prod her a bit.
Bring her into the office, let's just record her for a few hours. And...
show her a picture of a cat, so she says kitty.
Yeah. And, I mean, phenomenal bit of getting a performance out of a child.
Yeah.
It's clear as day they've just kind of Frankensteined what they need together, and it's a lot easier to do it with animation, but works beautifully.
Yeah, I think it is really nice, and I think it gives a great feel to that character. She's very passive for the most part, and she's not calling the shots, she's not directly involved, but obviously everything is going on around her.
She's also too young to be able to speak properly, other than the odd, I think she says the word boo nearly says kitty at one point.
Mike was out.
But I think that's really good because they're getting a performance out of someone too young to speak. The character, therefore, doesn't communicate in English. They might as well be speaking another language entirely. But that helps keep the human world completely separate from the monster world. And I just think that's really nice. It works really well to kind of build up this idea that kids are some unknown, potentially toxic... Because if they were just talking like people, it'd just be like, oh, why can't the monster world integrate with the human world? What's the problem?
Yeah. And I think you have to believe that they can just put her back and it will have no consequences as well. Like, she's not going to talk. But yeah, it's like when you have like a dog and you have to rescue the dog, or you're looking after the boss's dog and then it escapes and you have to run around town trying to get it back. It's like that kind of classic plot line. But if the dog talked with like Norm Macdonald's voice, it wouldn't work.
It's the plot of many classic cartoons of the 30s and probably like Laurel and Hardy shorts before it.
Oh, poor little laughing gravy.
Good reference.
Steve Buscemi?
See, that's a great example of what I mean, like obvious casting. And I feel like Steve Buscemi's voice never quite sits right for me in animation. There's just something about it. But he is a great Randall. It does work very well. So yeah.
Oh, I think he's perfect. Like across the board with this one, I feel it's a real case of like I just forget about I never feel like I'm watching John Goodman do a voice or anything like that. I just totally believe in the character. Same with Jennifer Tilly, even though I know these people from plenty of other things. I just think it marries together so well.
I must admit, when I sat down to watch Monsters University, almost every character I was going, oh God, is that John Krasinski? That is John Krasinski. What? I was constantly being taken out of it by hearing voices like, who's that? Oh, it's Bill Hader. It's Bill Hader. And I suppose I didn't have that in this one, but there's also way fewer characters.
Did you think this must have jumped out at you, Sol? You know, with all the things with the doors being flown around, and you go into this big warehouse full of doors and all that. Did you think that's a very Matt Groening sort of thing to do? That's his sort of fetish, isn't it?
What?
No?
Is your knowledge of The Simpsons based on the Sega Mega Drive game Bart's Nightmare and having never seen the show?
Yeah. Bart's Nightmare, yeah.
What happens in Bart's Nightmare? I'm completely lost.
In Bart's Nightmare, I think whenever you go into a new level, you have a choice of like 3 doors to go through, and it'll either be like Radioactive Man level or Itchy and Scratchy Land level or something like that. I mean, I don't know what Alan's on about.
I wasn't talking about doors specifically, but Matt Groening loves a conveyor belt sort of thing with people being sort of pulled around and all that sort of stuff.
Because in the opening sequence, Maggie gets scanned through the checkout. Yeah,
I've seen Bart's Door game and the opening to Simpsons. I never watched the actual show.
This is really sweet because Alan's trying to bond over animation knowledge with us.
I'm sure I've heard something where Matt Groening has a real thing for processing things, like conveyor belts.
I think you might be right, actually.
Like that. I think it was probably heard it in a Futurama commentary.
I can think of a good 3 instances where a character lands on like a conveyor belt in Futurama and gets processed by, robot arms or something. I feel like that must have happened on The Simpsons a few times as well. Maybe, did it happen when Homer went to hell in that Halloween special? I feel like he landed on a conveyor belt and no, it was an outtake in that clip show with all the deleted scenes. He gets chopped to little pieces and stuff. Yeah, you're right. They do that.
I mean, to be honest with you, it's not like I've watched everything and worked this out. I'm sure I've read an interview or heard something.
Yeah,
and they said that was a particular thing that Groening likes. So
that does ring a bell. Are you leading to the fact that David Silverman is one of the directors of this film?
Of course I am. Yeah, who of course was. Well, you tell him so.
David Silverman is one of many Pixar people who came up via The Simpsons. He was a director on The Simpsons, and then he went off to Pixar, worked on a few films such as this, and I think he actually went back to The Simpsons at a certain point because he directed The Simpsons movie. He is the director of The Simpsons movie.
They all went back for The Simpsons movie. Oh, they brought out all the old favourites. Do you know how I know that, Sol? I listened to a little podcast the other day called it's probably called Development Hell. I don't know for sure. It was at iHeartRadio.
Just while we're talking about the whole climax thing with the doors, though, like a fantastic sequence. I think that's a really great climax to this film. Like just building on stuff that's been set up earlier on. It's a great escalation. I think they really get the most out of it.
I think it's brilliant because it's really hard to think of a legitimate big action set piece, third act kind of sequence within this world as it's established, where you just go into kids' bedrooms and they construct something that's completely set up and logical within everything we've seen, but it's big and extravagant and inventive and ups the stakes and ups the ante, and it's just it's taking concepts that we've seen throughout the film to their kind of furthest extreme, I suppose. And I agree, it's great.
I was a bit disappointed though that they sort of went into these worlds and then nothing happened. Like, so they just go into a room and then there's like the Eiffel Tower in the background and like, oh yeah, and then that's it, and they just come out of again, and it just seemed a bit pointless, like going in and out the doors, because they weren't even like, oh, we can go in that door over there and we'll come out over here and we'll get ahead of Rambo.
Yeah,
it just seemed so let's just fill 5 minutes with them going in and out of doors.
I must admit, it would have been nice if they'd really grappled with it a bit. But I think this is the earliest example I can think of, excessive portals being played with in pop culture, which has become quite popular. Rick and Morty do it all the time. The video game Portal is entirely based around doing that. And
the fans with Parabox.
Yeah.
X-Men have done it. Some sequences with portals, really good.
Yeah, actually some really cool ones, yeah. And, this predates all of them.
Yeah, but you're right, actually, I've never really considered that. It's the first time that, before this, the only portals I can think of are kind of your standard, right, we're making a portal, go through here, and you're in a new place, and then that's it. Yeah. Whereas this actually plays with multiple things coming in from different angles and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I agree with what Alan said as well, like, they don't do much with the kind of, there's no kids in the rooms that they come through.
There's not even like, oh, Billy, improv some French.
Yeah, Alan just wanted a kid like with a baguette and a bit of garlic in his hand to go like sacre bleu, and then they like go back. That's all it was missing. But...
Well, if you're gonna have this bedroom that has got a view overlooking the Eiffel Tower, you may as well just do whatever stereotype crap you want. But wouldn't it be good if they just popped out of the door and Mike's got a string of garlic around his? Well, he hasn't got a neck, has he? Whatever.
You wanted them to, like, open a door into the middle of Loch Ness, stick the head out, someone takes a blurry photograph of the Loch Ness monster, then they go back to the real world. You wanted all that, didn't you?
Well, yeah, use it. They do play with the old, what was they called? Cryptozoology, with the Abominable Snowman. With John Ratzenberger.
Yes, I love that moment. It's set up earlier on in the film with a line of dialogue. It's just such a nice idea to tie it into our world a bit further, that the idea of, monsters that we know in the real world are all from this monster world. I love that. It's such a great idea. And it's a nice change of scenery. And
it is, but it's another bit that doesn't quite go anywhere, They sort of fall out and then they're friends again 2 minutes later. It's like,
it's your classic low point in the story structure.
Drag it out a bit,
Well, it's already a bit longer than I'd like, that sequence.
But I think this is my major problem with it, is just the structure.
It needs a Rocky montage, doesn't it? It needs them to like train up and get really tough out in the snow, and then they go back. Like they've actually learned something from being there.
Yeah. Some process, rather than we just had to find a bedroom and get back.
They should have had to do a raid on the village for some yak's milk or something, and that would involve them working together to scare someone or something like that.
Just to compare to Monsters University again, I think I actually preferred Monsters University because it had more of a structure, it had more of kind of through line that I knew where it was going. And I also think that the emotional story, although quite basic and we've seen it all before, it did at least work, it's all the steps.
Some people are really... I mean, look, I feel like we kind of have to do a little quick chat about Monsters U now if we're going to get into it this much, but I kind of agree with you there. I feel like a lot of people are really down on Monsters University for just taking this premise and making it into a kind of college movie. I don't think that's fair, but I'll get into it very shortly. But before that, do you have anything else to add to this, or should we get to our final thoughts, wrap-ups on Monsters, Inc.? Because I've kind of said my piece here.
Yep.
How does it actually end? Oh, so at the end, we haven't really talked about it. It turns out there's a whole nefarious plan with Randall and the boss who are trying to basically work out a better way to extract energy from children. And that's where our protagonists draw the line. Like, frightening them is fine, but actually kidnapping them is too far. But it's all linked into this energy crisis thing. And, of course, we find out that laughter is better than fear. So that's fine. It kind of makes sense within the world that we've set up. But, yeah, it does give us this whole kind of third act where they have to stop the boss guy, or Randall, really, isn't it, from doing... whatever they're actually doing. I never quite grasped. I mean, I understood the plot elements, but it never felt like it was serious enough. They're too busy fanning about with the little kids, so you lose this.
It should have been that they were doing some ancient monster rituals that involved, killing the kids and chopping them up and stuff. But I guess that's a bit too hardcore for Pixar.
Well, I think that's basically what they were going for, wasn't it? The Boo was going to be hurt by this.
Yes, well, that's exactly why I think it works, because it makes the ultimate threat of it sort of more relatable to kids watching, and brings it home, so you can get invested in it that way.
They should have been sacrificing Boo to, like, Cthulhu, and then he could have had a little cameo in there. But yeah, I just want to touch on the music really quickly as well.
Ding dong. Oh no.
It is, of course, Randy Newman, who was a kind of Pixar staple at this point. He did every Pixar film up to and including this one.
Can we get Randy in to sing the song for us? Because I had it in my head already.
All right, get him in. The famous Monsters, Inc. theme tune.
Yeah, what is it? There was definitely a specific song.
If I was rich man in the monster too, we live in a monster house, not a monster zoo. Something like that.
Yeah, it was good.
They're very similar.
I believe that song won the Oscar that year for Best Original Song, did it?
Wow. Deserved it.
It did, actually. I think it's a really good song. And I want to praise Randy Newman here. I think we kind of ripped the shit out of his... Sorry, Randy, I know you're right here, but we kind of... we kind of ripped the shit out of Randy's musical score writing abilities in our Oscars episode earlier this year. I think on the grounds that it all sounds the same. It all sounds like Plinky Plonk, Toy Story. And I think he does a really nice job here with Monsters, Inc. It's got quite a unique, by Randy Newman standards, jazzy feel to it. It's largely quite a distinct sound compared to his other work, and I think it's nice.
Can I ask, did he do the music for the second one, Monsters University? Because that music really jumped out at me more.
I think he did, because I remember... I mean, I'm just assuming, but I do remember thinking in that film, every single time he tried to score an action sequence, it just sounds like a Western. It's like he's learned how to do a kind of Toy Story action sequence score, and he's just stuck with it.
Yes. But yeah, that music jumped out at me more, and yeah, there was some nice jazzy moments in that. Yeah, that's it.
It's just what he does on the piano, but you kind of imagine vocal version. It turns into a kind of scat song, and there you go, jazz. Anyway, thanks for popping in, Randy. We'll see you again, I'm sure.
Okay. Right. So there he goes. That's what it sounds like when he walks. Okay, so shall we rate it?
Yeah, so I actually really didn't like this film when I was 11 or 12 or however old it was when it came out. But I don't know, I think I just had some weird chip on my shoulder about Pixar, and I think it was more about Finding Nemo than Monsters, Inc. But this was sort of collateral damage in there. I think I just remember getting annoyed with Finding Nemo back in the day. So this is a rare instance where I've gone back to something from my childhood and really grown to appreciate it when I was a bit older. But, you know, I did that probably 10 years ago, and my thoughts on it haven't changed much since then. But no, I think this is just such an inventive, playful, great film. Love the concept. Think it's realised really well. Zips along for all its flaws, which, you know, I think makes it some of the issues with the structure and the writing that we've pointed out here. None of them really get in the way for me because it is just such a breezy, good bit of fun. So no, I think it's a wonderful film. I give it a 9 out of 10.
Wow. I mean, I basically agree with you there, apart from the rating. So I think you're right. There's a bit of looseness in the structure and all that, but it's perfectly easy to watch and all fine. I give it a sturdy 7.
I'm same. I agree with most of what Sol said, apart from the wonderful bit and the rating. I think there's a lot of fun to be had here. Funnily enough, it's one that I used to really enjoy when I was a kid. And then getting older, I don't feel like there's much in here for me to relate to now. I feel like those Pixar films that I cited earlier on, Ratatouille, WALL-E, Up, Toy Story 3, I can go back to those and revisit them over and over again, and there's something quite enriching and relatable about it. Here, despite it, you know, a lot of it is like workplace comedy stuff, which isn't, you know, your usual sort of kids fare. I still don't feel like there's much there for me now as an adult. But I think it's very sweet. It's still a 7 out of 10, but it's one that I've kind of fallen a bit out with as I've gotten older. And I think a part of that is quite possibly to do with the fact that it's become a franchise and that, you know, just cheapen it in a way. Monsters University, for instance, I'm not a fan.
Really? See, it feels like a standalone film from, you know, start to finish, and obviously it was conceived as such. I don't think they ever thought about sequels or anything like that when they made it, but Pixar is now part of Disney and these things are inevitable, so they have made a sequel, or a prequel rather. There was actually a straight up sequel in development. It was in that era where Disney and Pixar were going to go their separate ways, and Disney started production on its own Toy Story 3 without Pixar. They also started developing a Monsters, Inc. film. I don't know, it was something about Boo coming back a bit older or something. I don't fucking know. But I think it got quite far through development, but you know, not nearly as far as their Toy Story 3 did, and as soon as Pixar and Disney merged, they just binned the whole thing and never looked at it again. There is some concept art out there floating around on the internet for it, if anyone's interested. But I must say, I think Monsters University it's a really weird way to expand this world and build it out and do something else with it. I think it works really well. I think it's it's like a film that shouldn't exist and shouldn't work, but I think it works really well. I think our discussion of Monsters, Inc. here keeps wading into, well, actually, in Monsters University, you see this and that, which I think is largely a testament to how well it kind of integrates itself into this world. I kind of agree with what you said before, Alan, that it's structured better. I think the characterization is arguably stronger, and I think there is an argument to be made that it's a better film. I don't think it is as good, but
I think I enjoyed watching it more, but I think you couldn't have a more basic plot.
Yeah. I think it's just done very well, but it is also very much like, let's bring this world down to the level of a high quality one, but a kind of TV comedy cartoon, where it's just kind of, you know, lots of sight gags and things and pretty simple plot to hang it on. I really like Monsters University, if I'm honest, and rewatching it, I was struck by how actually pretty good a film I think it is. I think it's a very worthy successor to Monsters, Inc. Although it does feel more like a weird spin-off than a, proper part 2.
I think that is my problem with it. Like, prequels are just immediately less interesting, I think. Particularly when it comes to Monsters, Inc. It's like the previous developed project that you mentioned about Boo being a grown-up and sort of exploring that. I don't think that would have been as good if they'd have made it then, but if the people involved, the A-star, A-list Pixar people came together and made that, I think that would be really interesting. But I think this just kind of shows that they don't want to get too far away from that very basic concept of, well, it's monsters who, go and scare kids in the real world, and we don't want to touch on melding those worlds too much. I don't think they want to go like Toy Story 3 with this property and kind of mature it. And it feels very stuck like that. And I just think that by getting the voice actors back as well, they just sound older, so that doesn't work for me either when the character's supposed to be younger.
I do get where you're coming from. I agree. Prequels are largely, you're just setting yourself up to fail. At best, you're going to make a prequel that works. You're never going to make a prequel that tops the first film. I think that perhaps why it doesn't bother me is I think they will make Monsters, Inc. 3 one day, and I think inevitably that will have to be set after the first film. But I suppose the problem is at the end of Monsters, Inc., they're no longer scaring kids, they're making them laugh, and they've completely changed the world in which they live, so anything they do will have to kind of account for that. But then, I feel like the obvious place to go is a Monsters, Inc. that is predominantly set in the human world, with the monsters getting stuck there. I think I'd trust Pixar to make something like that really well if they ever wanted to go there. I think it will happen. I think Monsters, Inc. is maybe not one of their flagship franchises, but it's definitely one of the most likely to get a sequel.
Do you want to rate Monsters University, seeing as though we've talked about it?
Yeah, I really like Monsters University. I'll give it a solid 8 out of 10.
Yeah, I think very solid is a good word. I think it's very basic in terms of its plot, but it does it well. The characters are engaging. I like the new characters they bring in. I gave it a 7. It's the same I gave to Monsters, Inc. I think if I had to watch one, I'd watch Monsters University, though. I think it's more engaging somehow.
It's that brand new fancy animation. You just want a Monsters, Inc. remaster, Alan.
I want a live-action Monsters, Inc.
It's a 6 from me, which I know isn't much of a sort of come down from Monsters, Inc., and I probably spoke a bit more favourably about that one. That's not to say that Monsters University isn't good in its own way. I think it's very... with its concept, it does it all very well and economically, and it's funny in places, and there's a lot of good monster gags and all that kind of stuff. But I just, on a personal level, I just don't want this story. It just feels completely futile for me in that regard. I had no interest in understanding, how these characters came to be friends, how they came into their jobs, all that, and that's just my takeaway from it. But then I'm not the target audience for this. This is made for kids who might be taken to the cinema by their parents for the first time, and maybe they haven't seen the first one. So this is just it feels like a complete sidestep in that regard. Whereas if I'm going to talk about a sequel really positively, Toy Story 3 feels like a real maturity, a real step forward for that series. This is very much a sidestep.
I think it reminds Calvin of his time at university, where he was a little swotty nerd, and we were the jocks who kept picking on him.
I don't.
But then he proved himself by making Bride of Vernon. And he carried a bunch of other people with him. Even though
it took that long. It took until our 3rd year of university.
Yeah, so we're starting Christmas now, officially at Diminishing Returns. Right now, we're getting into the spirit early, because I think everyone is this year, because 2020's been so shit, everyone seems to be making a point of starting Christmas too early.
My tree's been up a week.
They had mince pies in the shop in October. I was furious. Yeah, so what's next week then? It's our big Christmas special. There is currently, at the time of recording, another Patreon poll to select what film it is, but I'm going to assume it's the one that's currently in the lead, which means we'll be doing Die Hard 2.
No,
that's not a Christmas film, is it?
Nope.
No, I think it's terrible.
Don't give it away.
No, I haven't seen the film in a long time. I was just talking about the state of affairs.
And then after that, we'll be going straight into a 2-part review of the year episode like we did last year. And that's your real Christmas present there. That's going to be Christmas coming early. And then it's 2021, so everything will be fine then, won't it?
It'll all be over by Christmas.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Just one last reminder that I would be incredibly appreciative if you went to nextgreatpodcast.com, clicked on Vote Now, selected Development Hell, and then clicked Vote. That's all it takes. Nextgreatpodcast.com, and my show Development Hell could go to series, which would be amazing. Not only would I get to make the show, but, it'll be massively beneficial if you're a fan of the show. Should be able to get more exciting guests and things, dedicate more time to it, all of that. So please do go and vote. Thank you. Bye.